On May 31st, 1995, at 10:45 in the evening, a young dark-haired woman walked into the lobby of Oslo's prestigious Plaza Hotel. She checked in under the name Jennifer Fairgate, claiming to be 21 and from Belgium. The receptionist noted her confident, elegant demeanor and overlooked protocol by not requesting a passport or credit card. Jennifer was dressed in stylish black clothing and carried only a small travel bag. She mentioned a companion named Lois Fairgate, but this person never showed up. With no identification or payment on file, the woman proceeded to room 2805 and was effectively anonymous. The Plaza Hotel, one of the tallest and most luxurious in Norway, often catered to diplomats and other VIPs. In this grand yet impersonal setting, an unsettling mystery was about to unfold. On the 28th floor, Jennifer Fairgate kept to herself. Staff recalled that she spoke English and German with no noticeable accent, but they reported that she seemed reclusive, and they barely saw her. She ordered room service, tipping generously in cash, and otherwise hung a "Do Not Disturb" sign on her door. Over the next 2 days, she remained practically invisible to everyone around her. On the night of June 2nd, a room service attendant delivered dinner to the mystery woman's room. Jennifer accepted her meal with a polite nod and left a generous tip. There was no hint that she was in any distress whatsoever. Little did the hotel staff know that this was the last time anyone would see this woman alive. By the evening of June 3rd, the hotel grew worried about the unpaid bill for the room. A staff member was sent to contact Jennifer, but got no response and saw the "Do Not Disturb" sign still on the door. A security guard arrived around 7:50 p.m. and knocked firmly, announcing himself. He was met with a sudden, muffled shot from inside the room. The guard was startled and hurried to fetch the head of security. During that time, he left the room unattended for about 15 minutes, a crucial period of time that will later factor into why this is such a bizarre mystery. When they managed to open the door, they found Jennifer Fairgate slumped on the bed, with a single shot to her forehead. She held a warm weapon loosely in her hand, and the room's door had been double locked from the inside. It appeared at first that she had done it herself, but later forensic results would question whether this was actually the case. That said, by the time the room was unlocked, no other person was present, and the scene was eerily quiet. Detectives scoured the room for evidence of the woman's identity and what had happened, but they found almost nothing. No passport, no wallet, no keys or personal papers were in the room. The woman had brought very few belongings, and those she did bring offered no clues. All the labels had been meticulously cut out of her clothes, denying police any hint of where her garments came from. The bathroom held no toiletries, not even a toothbrush, makeup, or hairbrush. The only items of note were the weapon and a black briefcase filled with ammo. Hotel phone records later showed she had attempted to dial 2 international numbers, both in Belgium, during her stay, but those calls were to non-existent lines. The weapon found in her hand had its serial number partially filed off, making it untraceable. Every sign pointed to a deliberate effort to erase any trail of who this supposed Jennifer Fairgate really was. Standard forensic tests turned up few meaningful leads. The woman's fingerprints and DNA were collected and circulated via Interpol, but no matches were found in any criminal or missing person database. It was confirmed that the name and address she provided were false. For example, the Belgian address she had given didn't exist. There was no evidence that any Lois or other companion had ever been in the room. Only her fingerprints were found. The autopsy revealed that the fatal blast was fired with the weapon pressed against her head. Curiously, lab tests found no gunshot residue on her hands, an unusual result if she had fired the weapon herself. No alcohol was detected in her blood, and while other toxicology screening was limited, there was no sign of common substances. In fact, the coroner noted that her stomach contents suggested she had died many hours before the security guard ever knocked, a baffling discrepancy in the timeline. She appeared to be in her mid-20s and stood around 5'2", with short dark hair and blue eyes. She had expensive dental work indicating what was likely at least a middle-class upbringing in a place with high-quality dentistry. Given all the facts, the Norwegian authorities thought that she would be identified rapidly. Despite international alerts and widespread media coverage, no family or friend ever came forward to identify her. Norwegian newspapers dubbed her the Plaza Hotel Woman, the mysterious guest who died alone in a high-rise hotel. After months of investigation, the police had no suspects and not even a real name for the victim. In 1996, authorities reluctantly ruled the death a probable self-deletion and closed the case, though they publicly stated they couldn't be entirely sure due to the forensic oddities. In line with routine procedure for those sorts of cases in Norway, much of the physical evidence was eventually destroyed after the case closed, making future re-examination impossible. The unknown woman was quietly buried in Oslo under a simple gravestone, her identity still a mystery. Over the years, several theories have been proposed to explain Jennifer Fairgate's fate and who she was in life. Some speculate that Jennifer might have gone to extreme lengths to die anonymously, traveling under an alias and removing personal traces so no loved ones would be notified. However, no note was found, and it's highly unusual for a young person planning such a thing to obtain an untraceable weapon, especially in Europe where this isn't so easy to do. Further, the lack of residue on her hands was viewed as very unusual by investigators. These oddities make the theory that she did it herself far from straightforward, even if it's the theory preferred by investigators. Another theory is that she was slain, and the scene was staged. In this scenario, an unknown perpetrator, perhaps the mysterious Lois or someone she met, could have been let into the room, ended her, and then slipped out before security returned. The missing residue and the untraceable weapon lend credence to this idea. As the guard left to get help, the door was unwatched for about 15 minutes, a window in which the perpetrator might have escaped unseen. In this scenario, there were also no signs of forced entry, suggesting Jennifer likely opened the door for the individual. Notably, security cameras weren't ubiquitous at the time, making the hallway essentially unmonitored. Yet no clear evidence of any other person was ever found, making the theory difficult to prove. The most intriguing speculation is that Jennifer Fairgate was involved in espionage. Everything about her clandestine stay, the false identity, lack of personal items, and choice of a hotel frequented by VIPs, fits the profile of an intelligence operative. Some experts noted that her methods of maintaining anonymity resembled classic techniques taught to spies. Perhaps she was on a secret mission and was eliminated because of what she knew. Under this theory, her death could have been part of a covert operation. This would also potentially explain why she spoke English and German at a native level and without any discernible accent. It would also explain why no one ever claimed her body. If she was a spy, any agency she worked for would deny knowledge of her. Further, her family may have been informed that she had fallen in the line of duty and to not seek or respond to any further questioning on the matter. Decades later, the true identity of the woman known as Jennifer Fairgate, the Oslo Plaza woman, and the exact circumstances of her death remain unsolved. The case stayed mostly dormant until a Norwegian investigative journalist pushed for her body to be exhumed in 2016 for fresh forensic analysis. Isotope tests on her teeth and advanced DNA profiling suggested she likely spent her early life in Central Europe, possibly Germany, and was a few years older than the age she had given. Even so, her DNA hasn't matched any known individual in any international database. Like many cases such as this, the most obvious next step would be to conduct genetic genealogy testing and try to reconstruct her family tree. However, if the espionage theory is true, it may explain why this hasn't happened yet. Rhonda Smith was a 21-year-old from Coweta County, Georgia. She was known for her striking height and came in at 6 feet tall, earning her the nickname Legs. In 1983, she worked for a time as a dancer, a job she kept hidden from her family. But by early 1984, she had quit dancing and was preparing to start her own dog grooming and breeding business. Engaged to be married and looking forward to a bright future, Rhonda was focused on building this new chapter of her life. On February 27, 1984, Rhonda left home around dawn to meet a friend for a shopping trip to Atlanta's Lenox Square Mall. She borrowed a blue 1981 Chevrolet pickup truck for the drive. Rhonda never arrived to meet her friend, and she didn't return home that evening. Alarmed by her absence, her family reported her missing that same day. Not long after, a grim discovery was made in the Lenox Square parking deck. The borrowed pickup truck was found abandoned there with no sign of Rhonda. The vehicle was locked and the keys were missing, but otherwise it appeared undisturbed. Inside, investigators noted two curious items: an empty wine glass and a beer can on the front console. It appeared to investigators that Rhonda may have met someone and shared a drink in the truck, but I'll come back to this in a moment. There were no visible signs of a struggle in or around the vehicle, and nothing obvious to indicate what had happened to its missing driver. Crucially, police at the time didn't collect the drinking containers for forensic analysis, and any potential fingerprints went uncollected. Further, any DNA evidence which was contained on the containers wouldn't have been useful in '84, but may have yielded results by the '90s. As such, it's unknown if she even drank either of the drinks, or if these items had just been left in the truck she borrowed. This abandoned truck and its contents were the only clues, and they deepened the mystery of Rhonda's disappearance. With scant evidence and no witnesses, the investigation into Rhonda Smith's disappearance faced an uphill battle from the start. Her fiancé promptly filed missing person reports in both jurisdictions to ensure no time was lost. Both the Atlanta police and her home county's sheriff's office opened cases, since she lived in one county but vanished in another. Detectives interviewed her fiancé, family, and friends, trying to piece together her last known movements. Nothing indicated that Rhonda had planned to run away. She had left behind all her personal belongings and had upcoming plans, suggesting she fully intended to return home. Foul play was strongly suspected, but investigators had little to go on beyond the truck in the mall garage. No one reported seeing an abduction or confrontation at Lenox Square that day, and any person who might have been with Rhonda remained unidentified. In the days and months following her disappearance, Rhonda's loved ones conducted their own searches and handed out flyers, refusing to let the case fade. However, despite this, over time, the case went cold, and decades passed without answers. For many years, Rhonda's story received relatively little public attention. In fact, her information wasn't even entered into the National Name Us Missing Persons database until 2018, 11 years after the service was launched. One aspect of Rhonda's background that investigators examined was her previous work as a dancer. She had performed at the Tattletale Lounge, a rock and roll themed club in Atlanta, for several months prior to quitting that job. It's unknown if this had anything to do with her disappearance, but police had to consider the possibility. This line of work could have introduced Rhonda to a variety of people, including potentially dangerous individuals, so detectives looked into acquaintances and patrons from the club. That said, there was no clear evidence linking anyone from her dancing days to the case, and no indication that Rhonda was in any kind of trouble because of that job. Over the years, several theories have emerged to explain what might have happened to Rhonda Smith. One theory is that she was the victim of a stranger abduction at the mall. Under this scenario, Rhonda could have been approached by someone in the Lenox Square parking area and then lured or forced away from her truck before anyone noticed. The presence of 2 drinks suggested to the cops that she met someone there. However, they never actually preserved the evidence. There's a very real possibility that she consumed both drinks, or had nothing to do with any of the drinks at all, given that the truck was borrowed. A further angle considers whether Rhonda's past at the nightclub might have led to her encountering a dangerous individual who later harmed her. Perhaps a patron or someone from that environment developed an obsession and followed her on the day she disappeared. Under this theory, the individual may have abducted her when she rebuked his advances. Others have suggested that she may have been abducted by a trafficker who wanted to force her to continue to work in the industry. These theories, however, are purely speculative at present. Still, another theory suggests that she wanted to escape the life she was living and decided to leave on her own terms. Again, no evidence has been found to support this, and there's been no familial contact for over 4 decades, casting major doubt on this theory. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to hit that like button, subscribe, and also turn on all notifications. Also, don't forget to check out my Patreon if you want to take it to the next level. On August 20th, 1966, a young man flying a kite on Vintim Hill in Niterói, Brazil, stumbled upon a grim and perplexing scene. Lying side by side in the brush were the bodies of 2 men. They were dressed neatly in matching formal suits and covered by waterproof raincoats. Most bizarre of all, each man's face was partially obscured by a lead mask, a crude hand-cut eye shield with no eye holes, like lead blindfolds covering only the eyes. The bodies were partly covered with grass, and near the corpses authorities found an empty bottle of mineral water and a small package containing 2 wet towels. There were no obvious signs of trauma or a struggle at the scene, and no immediate clues as to how these men had died. The discovery quickly grew into one of Brazil's most enduring mysteries, later dubbed the Lead Masks Case. Police were alerted, but initially had difficulty reaching the remote spot due to rough terrain, finally retrieving the bodies by the following day. The 2 men were soon identified as Manuel Pereira de Cruz, 32, and Miguel José Viana, 34, both electronics technicians from Campos, a town relatively close by. Investigators pieced together the men's last known movements. On August 17th, 3 days before the bodies were found, Manuel and Miguel had told their families and colleagues that they were headed out to purchase a vehicle. They reported that they would be carrying a substantial sum of money for this task. They boarded a bus from Campos to Niterói and arrived that afternoon around 2:30 p.m. In Niterói, they bought 2 raincoats from a shop and stopped at a local bar to purchase a bottle of water. The waitress later recalled Miguel was very nervous and in a hurry, constantly checking his watch. Witnesses reported that around 3:15 p.m. the pair headed toward Vintim Hill, and according to some accounts, they even hitched a ride partway up in a jeep with 2 unidentified men. That evening was the last time Manuel and Miguel were seen alive. When authorities examined the bodies on Vintim Hill, they found a few cryptic clues that only deepened the mystery. Besides the lead masks, towels, and empty water bottle, police discovered a small notebook among the men's belongings. Most of the notebook's pages contained lists of electronic components and formulas related to the men's work as repair technicians. However, on one page was a handwritten message that appeared to be instructions or a plan for the day. Translated to English, this eerie note says, 4:30 p.m. be at the specified location. 6:30 p.m. ingest capsules. After the effect protect metals. Await signal mask. According to sources familiar with Portuguese, the grammar and phrasing were odd and disjointed, as if written in a hurry or code. No capsules or pills were found at the scene, but the note strongly suggested that the men had indeed planned to swallow something at 6:30 that evening. Investigators interpreted "after the effect protect metals" to mean something about safeguarding certain metals or equipment once the capsule's effects kicked in. Await signal mask seemed to imply they should then put on the lead masks and wait for a signal. But of course, like with almost everything with this case, nothing is for certain at all. From the beginning, police were confounded by the lack of clear evidence. The men carried no obvious experimental apparatus or device with them that might explain what they were attempting. The substantial cash they supposedly had for buying a car was also potentially missing. Only a much smaller amount of money was found on their bodies, not enough to make such a large purchase. There were also no signs of violence, no marks, injuries, or indication of struggle, and the area around the bodies was undisturbed. Notably, an autopsy was delayed for weeks due to a backlog at the coroner's office. By the time the exam took place, the body's internal organs had badly decomposed in the tropical heat. Crucially, this meant that toxicology tests were never performed. The medical examiner didn't test for any poisonous substances or anything else in the men's systems because of this decomposition. As a result, the cause of death remained officially undetermined. In the absence of a clear medical cause or any obvious external explanation, rumors and theories began to spread. With little to go on, investigators and journalists alike began delving into Manuel and Miguel's personal lives and beliefs. A breakthrough came when a friend of the men, Elcio Gomez, came forward with startling information. Elcio told police that both men were part of a small circle of scientific spiritualists, an informal group of local electronic hobbyists who were fascinated by the paranormal. According to Elcio, this group had been conducting secret experiments in an effort to contact spirits or even extraterrestrial beings. In fact, Elcio revealed that just a couple of months earlier, in June 1966, he and the two deceased men had built a device in Manuel's backyard as an experiment to communicate with aliens. Manuel's father denied this and instead said that the men were actually just making explosives in the backyard. Whatever the case, the men were definitely experimenting with something. With such strange clues and evidence, a variety of theories emerged to explain what might have happened to Miguel and Manuel. One of the leading theories is that the two men died from ingesting a toxic substance as part of a planned spiritual ritual or scientific experiment. The cryptic note's mention of ingesting capsules at 6:30 p.m. suggests they deliberately took some sort of pill or drug on the hill. Elcio's testimony that they were scientific spiritualists trying to contact spirits or aliens hints that the capsules could have been substances intended to induce a trance or vision. If the capsules contained a powerful substance, the men might have accidentally overdosed. Others speculate that they may have whipped up the concoction themselves, accidentally creating a toxic substance. Unfortunately, since no toxicology tests were conducted, we have no proof of what exactly they consumed. However, circumstantial evidence supports this scenario. The men's careful preparations imply they expected to experience something intense, not to perish on the hill. They brought water and towels, wore raincoats to stay dry in the storm, and crafted lead masks to shield against a blinding vision. If they intended such an outcome, such precautions likely make little sense. Everything indicates they anticipated surviving whatever phenomenon they hoped to encounter. Another theory considers whether the men might have been victims of a deliberate plot, perhaps slain through poison by a third party. There are a few hints that suggest someone else could have been involved in their final hours. Some sources indicate the handwritten instructions in the notebook didn't match the handwriting of either Miguel or Manuel. At the end of the day, there was no evidence of physical struggle or forced poisoning. The men showed no signs of being restrained or made to ingest something against their will. If foul play was involved, it likely relied on the deception related to convincing the two men to take whatever they took. No discussion of the lead masks case would be complete without mentioning the more extravagant theories that have swirled around it. Given the strange circumstances, many have speculated that the two men might have been waiting for a UFO encounter or some kind of otherworldly event. On the evening of August 17th, a luminous oval object was allegedly seen hovering over Vintim Hill, glowing with an orange halo and emitting rays of light. Ufologists have suggested that Miguel and Manuel were attempting to rendezvous with aliens, with the masks protecting them from the spacecraft's radiant energy or lights. In this scenario, perhaps the men's deaths were caused by an unforeseen effect of close contact with extraterrestrials, a notion that drifts firmly into the realm of the speculative. Others liken the case to a precursor of cult events like Heaven's Gate, imagining that the two willingly gave up their lives in hopes of a cosmic journey. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Brazilian authorities eventually shelved the case, and it faded from headlines without a definitive resolution. While we may never know the full truth, the most plausible scenario is a somewhat simple one. The men likely, though not certainly, fell victim to their own ambitious experiment with whatever they had ingested. The mystery that'll always remain is why these two men ended up doing what they did on that hill in Brazil on August 17th, 1966. Late at night, on a desolate stretch of Archer Avenue southwest of Chicago, just outside the city limits, local drivers have often told the same unsettling story. They pick up a young female hitchhiker, a pale girl in a white party dress, who quietly asks for a ride. But as the car nears the gates of Resurrection Cemetery in Justice, a village just outside Chicago, the mysterious passenger suddenly disappears. For nearly a century, this vanishing hitchhiker has come to be known as Resurrection Mary, and is perhaps the region's most famous ghost. The legend's origin story is typically set in the early 1930s. As it's often told, a young woman named Mary spent an evening dancing with her boyfriend at the Willowbrook Ballroom in suburban Willow Springs. After a heated argument with her date, Mary stormed out into the night, walking home along Archer Avenue in her white dress and heels. On that fateful walk, she was struck by a motorist and left for dead, with the driver speeding off into the darkness. Mary's grief-stricken parents later buried her in Resurrection Cemetery, still wearing her beloved white gown. With her life cut short so suddenly, it's said that Mary's restless spirit began wandering the roadside, trying to find her way home. According to the lore, reports of a ghostly hitchhiker near Resurrection Cemetery soon emerged. By the mid-1930s, local residents were whispering about a pale young woman seen wandering Archer Avenue at night who would inexplicably vanish. One of the earliest detailed encounters occurred in 1939. A Chicago man named Jerry Pallas claimed he met a pretty blonde woman one evening at a neighborhood dance hall on the south side of Chicago. She said her name was Mary, and Jerry and Mary danced all night long. He then offered her a ride home, and as they drove along Archer Avenue, Mary asked him to stop by the cemetery. He pulled over by the gates of Resurrection Cemetery, and at that moment the young woman suddenly disappeared from his car. Stunned, Jerry realized that she had simply vanished into thin air. The next day, bewildered and curious, he went to the address Mary had given him during their conversation. There, he was shocked to learn that the real Mary, whose photograph he saw in the home, had died several years earlier and was buried in Resurrection Cemetery. Jerry Palace's story, with its uncanny revelation, became the first widely circulated testimonial that gave the ghost a name and a human backstory. The 1970s produced multiple reports that closely mirrored the initial story. In 1973, for example, a cab driver came into an establishment across the street from Resurrection Cemetery, terrified and asking about a young woman in a white dress. He said that she had fled his taxi without paying, but how she left the cab was the real mystery. He swore he had picked up a hitchhiker who asked to be let out by the cemetery, and then she simply vanished from his cab. According to the legend, he was informed that he had just had a run-in with Resurrection Mary. In 1976, another notable incident made headlines. A passerby reported seeing a woman locked inside the cemetery gates. When police arrived, they found the heavy wrought iron bars of the gate bent wide apart. Eerily, the bars appeared to have scorch marks and what looked like hand imprints, as if someone had forced them open with some sort of inhuman strength. However, cemetery officials maintained that a truck accident likely caused the damage, but many locals had their doubts. Throughout the late 1970s, several drivers on Archer Avenue claimed that they nearly hit a running girl in a white dress, who then was nowhere to be found. Sightings continued into the early 1980s, though they became less frequent over time. In 1980, it was said that dozens of people spotted an apparition matching Mary's description along Archer Avenue on the same weekend. Some claim that this was likely a prank, played by local teens, but others speculate that this was a period of intense importance to the ghostly woman. Another notable report, possibly the last high-profile case, came in 1989. That year, a motorist and his friend claimed they struck a young woman who ran in front of their car near Resurrection Cemetery. They were alarmed, but when they stopped, they found no trace of anyone injured or any damage to the vehicle. By the end of the 1980s, the Resurrection Mary phenomenon had peaked. The local authorities even installed bright streetlights along Archer Avenue in the mid-1980s, and as the road became less shadowy, new sightings of Mary grew rare. Yet the legacy of those decades of encounters was by then deeply ingrained in Chicago's lore, and Mary remained the city's most talked about ghost. Putting aside the question of whether there is any ghost at all, one enduring question has been the true identity of the young woman behind the ghost. Over the years, researchers have tried to match Resurrection Mary to a real-life person, and one name often proposed is Mary Bregovy. Mary Bregovy was a real Chicago woman who died in 1934 at age 21, around the same age as the ghostly hitchhiker appears to be. Bregovy was cut down in an automobile accident in Chicago's downtown loop. She was known to be a fan of dancing and nights out on the town, and it's recorded that she was laid to rest in Resurrection Cemetery. These parallels, the timing of her passing, her love of dancing, and her burial at the same cemetery, led many to suspect Bregovy could be the spirit in white. Jerry Palace's famous 1939 encounter also lines up with Bregovy's timeline. After all, when he went to the address, he learned that Mary had been dead for 5 years. That span matched the time since Bregovy's 1934 death. All of this made Mary Bregovy a compelling candidate for Resurrection Mary's true identity for a long time. However, not everyone is convinced that Bregovy is the ghost. There are some notable inconsistencies, such as the fact that the ghost is usually described as blonde, while Mary Bregovy had dark hair. Notably, Bregovy's fatal accident also took place miles away from Archer Avenue. Another prominent theory points to a girl named Anna Maria Norkus. Anna was a teenager in 1927 when she perished in a car crash while returning home from an evening of dancing with her family. The accident happened not far from the area, and she had light blonde hair, more in line with the usual Resurrection Mary description. All that said, Anna Maria was a younger teenager, which doesn't line up with the usual description of Resurrection Mary as a woman in young adulthood. Others support the idea that Resurrection Mary isn't a single entity at all, but numerous young women who have been buried in the cemetery under tragic circumstances. Whatever the case, the story of Resurrection Mary remains likely the most well-documented ghost story in Chicago's history.